11th hour on AM 1420, The Answer, with Jim McIntyre.
The events of this past week have been almost beyond belief, with the recovery of Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight from a house on Seymour Avenue in Cleveland. How has it affected those three women and the little girl that Amanda Berry had in her time during captivity? We're going to pose that question to Kathleen M Payne. She's a clinical psychologist with Royalton Psychological Associates, and she specializes in child psychology and trauma. This is Children's Mental Health Week, so the timing couldn't be better. Kathy, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
How are these three women going to approach life from here on out? Can there be any sense of normalcy for them?
They've missed out on a lot of years of their life. So they've got, in a way, two sets of things they need to do. They need to go through some of the experiences that they missed. Two of them missed a lot of their adolescence. Michelle missed her young adulthood. They need to make up for that in a way, but also you can't go back to the past because they're all now in their 20s or 30s, so they've got a double situation that they're in.
Is this a situation that is treatable? Can they overcome this?
I believe they can. They've already shown that they're very resilient to have survived as long as they did, and to probably have endured you can only imagine what they've endured.
Well, we can only imagine, although we are hearing some, very shocking, horrible things. Would they be suffering from post-traumatic stress?
They probably would meet the criteria for the post-traumatic stress, but with them, this stress has been so ongoing and so abusive that it is even likely more severe than that because it's been ongoing for years for them.
You've called it complex trauma.
Yes, complex trauma is an area where usually it's not a single isolated event, whereas with something like post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a car accident, it's a shooting, it's more of an isolated event. With complex trauma, it's ongoing abuse, ongoing neglect. It's interpersonal in nature, whereas with PTSD, it could be anybody that created the traumatic incident. With complex trauma, this is at the hands of somebody who is like a caregiver, and in this instance, it looks like this individual, Mr. Castro, turned into a caregiver for them.
It sounds like it's also something that women in abusive relationships, or men for that matter, would find themselves suffering from.
Yes.
Some people have wondered many people have wondered, how these women could have been held captive for as long as they were. For more than 10 years in the case of Michelle Knight, for 10 years for Amanda Berry, and almost 10 for Gina DeJesus. I've heard of the Stockholm Syndrome. I think we all have. Is it possible that they began to sympathize with their captors?
That's one of the possibilities. Another possibility is that their captors could have threatened them, threatened their family, so that they had such fear to do anything that they stayed for their own safety and for the safety of their family. Also, there's a 6-year-old little girl involved, and who knows if she was threatened or things like that. And also, these victims tend to feel like they have done something wrong a lot of the time, and they feel like since there's something wrong with them, they need to keep the secret and people will no longer accept them.
That happens in children as well.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's kind of where you come in.
Yes.
You deal with children who have faced traumatic situations, correct?
Yes. I work with a lot of children who have severe neglect, abuse, issues that we don't think any child should have to endure.
And how do they get past it?
They're amazingly resilient. I believe everyone wants to grow. Everyone has a desire for health. And it's helping to remove the roadblocks for them so that they can get back on the right track and go towards recovery.
Now, this being Children's Mental Health Week, you have some statistics about children and how many suffer from mental health conditions.
Yes. For example, 1 in 10 children has a mental health illness that affects their day-to-day functioning.
And what do you mean by a mental illness?
It could range from something like depression, which is often not looked at for children.
Kids get depression?
Kids most definitely get depression, but it looks different in a child than it does in an adult.
How so?
In a child, they're going to tend to be more irritable and cranky, so you think they're just being oppositional. They also will have more problems with sleep, and you'll see a lot of decrease in their grades, which are things you don't necessarily see with the adults.
This is clinical?
Yes.
Clinically proven?
Yes. Research studies have shown it. There was a big study by the National Institute of Mental Health that has really looked at the difference between childhood or youth and adult.
Well, what are some of the other mental health conditions you deal with in your clients?
Well, I deal with issues ranging from anxiety, especially in gifted children. They have a lot of anxiety because they can't turn their mind off, and it's always racing. Also,
Never thought about that.
it's with gifted children, it can be a blessing and a curse because they're open to learning so many things, but developmentally they can't quite make sense of it yet, and they can't turn off their mind. So it's racing all the time, and you have a lot of difficulties with sleep, a lot of excess worrying. For example, my daughter is a gifted child, and she'll tell you that she can't turn her mind off. And she thinks about something as extreme as, in a couple billion years, the world's going to end. What if we haven't been able to get off the planet yet and have found another Goldilocks planet? All these billions of people are going to die. Those are the types of things that race through anxious children's minds.
Doesn't that make your heart hurt?
Oh, especially with the kids.
Right. It sounds a little bit like autism with autistic kids who can't filter out distractions.
In a way, that's an interesting connection. But with the autistic kids, they tend to be more withdrawn and engage in more stereotypical types of behavior, whereas with anxious kids, they're still able to do that social give and take and relate. They just let their minds just go and worry about so much that it affects their ability to focus at school, get their chores done, and things like that.
All right, let's bring it back to the Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, Michelle Knight situation. They're not children anymore, but our children have been watching the events unfolding on television almost nonstop. How is that affecting our kids?
It can affect them in different ways. Some of the kids, for one thing, I would encourage limiting the media for the children because it can be overwhelming and it can lead to fear. And depending on their age, you want to look for a few different things. In a preschooler, you want to see if they're becoming more clingy and more worried about being separated from you, if they're having nightmares, if they're engaging in a lot of repetitive play that doesn't seem relaxed and carefree like you'd want your preschooler to be. With school-age kids, you may hear them talk about their safety. You know, what if they're walking home from school? How do they deal with strangers? What do? They may retell the story time and time again, trying to make sense of it.
Right.
They may be afraid to go to school. You may see a lot of the difficulty again with sleeping and nightmares, problems with concentrating at school. And then in teenagers, you're going to probably see more of that crankiness, some self-destructive behavior because they're scared and they don't know how else to deal with it. A lot of somatic complaints, more withdrawal from friends and family.
Yeah. Kids face a tough road, don't they?
They do, and we often don't think about everything that kids are exposed to today.
Does your business swell when incidents like Newtown and Chardon occur?
A lot of phone calls swell, and then depending on what's going on, sometimes I'll just provide the reassurance over the phone and let them know they're doing it right, and then come back and see me if they need it. But there usually are a few kids who do need that extra support. Just this week I've gotten 3 children who are really anxious with everything going on and stranger safety and what if they're abducted. So I've gotten 3 new clients this week from this.
And how do you handle that? What do you tell them?
First thing is I encourage the parents that they're doing the right thing and that no parent is perfect. So you want to just try to learn some tips to help them to feel relaxed, their children. You want to encourage their safety because until the child feels safe, they're not going to be able to relax enough to look at things and to feel secure.
So you can't really hover too much.
No, but what you can do is remind them, I heard this from a friend of mine, there's always going to be more helpers than hurters. So you help children identify who are those helpers, and if they ever are in a situation that makes them scared or is unsafe, how to look for those helpers.
I'm trying to help my child deal with the anxiety that has developed over the past couple of days because of what's happened in the news. I want them to recognize the fact that there are more helpers than hurters, so how do I do that?
Be careful not to push the conversation too hard. One of the best places I encourage parents to talk with their children is at the dining room table, at the kitchen table. Because it tends to be a naturally more relaxed time when family are pulled together. And ask them open-ended questions. Find out what they've heard, what they know, what rumors maybe have circulated at school, what have teachers said, and just listen to them. And if you hear something that's inaccurate, clarify it for them so they don't have misinformation. And if you hear them being really nervous or asking questions, answer them in a really honest, calm manner. Watch your own anxiety, because we're all naturally a little more anxious with everything going on. So you want to watch your own anxiety and provide them with that reassurance. Remind them of safety things you may have set up in the home, how to deal with different situations. And if you find then that after a day or two of that, the child still isn't calming down, that may be a time to give a call for someone.
Right. Of course, that's assuming that people still do sit down at the kitchen table for a meal.
That is true. I am a big advocate of that. I think that is a very important thing for families to still do.
It's a great piece of advice. Kathy Payne is with us. She's a clinical psychologist. She specializes in child psychology and trauma with Royalton Psychological Associates. And, because of what has happened in the past week with Amanda Berry and Gina DeJesus and Michelle Knight being recovered from Seymour Avenue, where they were being held captive for so many years, issues could develop in our children. Anxiety issues, anything else that we should be looking for?
With this, related to this, I would watch for the anxiety. But it also could lead to depression, because anxiety and depression are very similar and often overlap. And if they are feeling really scared and they are feeling overwhelmed, that could tend to lead to that childhood depression.
Are children treated for anxiety and depression the same way adults are treated?
Yes and no.
Stumped you.
Stumped me on that one. Yes and no. Children aren't going to sit there and talk like we're talking right now. Mm-hmm. They need creative ways to express themselves. And so do many adults, I would argue, too.
Yeah.
So you do things like certain games, drawing activities. You'd be amazed how many teenagers open up and start talking when they have Play-Doh in their hands. Something to kind of distract them and create a different sensory experience.
Even teenagers?
I just had a 14-year-old yesterday. She was sitting there really quiet, and I said, hey, why don't we go over here and pick out a Play-Doh? And she got it out, and she just started playing with it, and then just having that extra sensory distraction in a way, she started opening up about all sorts of things that are going on with her.
The FBI has, as I understand, employed people like you, psychologists who are kind of treating these women to help them transition back into normal society. And that's a good thing, right?
Yes. The key with that, though, is you don't want to push them, which I'm sure they know. You don't want to push them. You want to give them the space, do what you can to reaffirm that sense of safety for them, and then let them start to open up on their own. Maybe it's through journaling. Maybe for them it's through art. Maybe it's just through talking. But give them the opportunity to start talking about it on their own first.
They're calling this a miracle, the miracle in Cleveland. And what we can do is use it as a teaching moment, right?
Yes.
Teaching children about stranger danger and about handling the anxieties that come with everyday life.
Right, because we can't isolate them like we used to. I was just with some parents after soccer practice earlier in the week talking about how when they were young, they never thought of these things. They rode their bike everywhere. They were outside until dark. As soon as you get home from school, you get your snack and you're kicked back outside until dark.
That's right.
And they don't feel that they can do that anymore. And it's like, well, how do we get back to some of that? How do you make sure that the neighborhood is safe so the kids can play? How do you make sure they know about stranger danger? My kids know what to do if they are ever approached. They know. You scream bloody murder stranger, and if someone tries to touch you, they know what part of the body to go after that they're going to be most vulnerable if it's a male. And then they know to run like crazy and scream for help.
What got you interested in psychology, Kathy?
I've always liked kids. When I was younger, I was the type that would always, for some reason, kids would gravitate towards me when I was at places. And frankly, I'm more comfortable with kids than I am adults. Just something about it. And also in my own childhood, I was unfortunate in that my mother had passed when I was a child. And I looked at all the ways different people tried to help at that time and how people tried to do what they thought was best, understandably making mistakes because they were kind of on their own. It was a group of people. I call it, I've been lucky to have a lot of mothers who have helped me at different stages in life. And I wanted to be able to make sure other kids, when they experience something really upsetting, don't have to go through it alone and that caregivers can have support.
Do you have a website?
I do. It's royaltonpsych.com.
Royalton Psychological Associates, Kathy Payne has been our guest. Thank you for your helpful advice, Kathy.
Thank you for having me.